Welcome to Markets Plus. I'm Eric Smith, Vice Chairman of BMO Bank, and I'm thrilled to introduce our next episode in the series surrounding the Latino Leaders Index500, powered by BMO. In this episode, you'll find an insightful conversation about purposeful leadership and the power of collaboration with Alan Tannenbaum, CEO and Group Head of BMO Capital Markets, and Daniel Alegre, CEO of TelevisaUnivision, the world's leading Spanish-language media and content company. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to check out a few of our other episodes on this topic. Now to Alan and Danielle.
Welcome to Markets Plus, where leading experts from across BMO discuss factors shaping the markets, economy, industry sectors, and much more. Visit bmocm.com/Markets Plus for more episodes.
Thank you so much, Eric. Danielle, please. First, welcome everybody. Such a pleasure to see you all here this evening. This is an event I really look forward to every year. The sense of friendship, community support that people bring to this event is something that I find inspiring. It's about respecting partners who've achieved amazing successes in so many different businesses, and the opportunity to recognize that success is really fantastic. You see the mutual appreciation and the respect that's generated from this event is really fantastic. So thank you for joining us all. I'm thrilled to have Danielle here tonight. I'm going to break this into three areas for this group. We're going to talk a little bit about Danielle's career and career choices, a little bit about your experience as a Latino leader, and then transition maybe to ask a couple questions about, I think, what's relevant to everybody today, what's going on in the world, AI impact on your business. So I'll try 20 minutes to divide it into three areas. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation and having a chance to talk to you. You know, when Eric was talking, I can't believe I forgot. I grew up in Mexico City for my first 10 years of my life. Then my dad shipped my mom and the kids to Toronto. And when Eric was talking, I remembered that the very first bank account I ever had as a child was Bank of Montreal.
Remember that really well. I'm not just being your typical media executive who's like pandering to the audience, but
I actually remember I think I left it with $7.25 back in 1982. Wish I had invested that in Bitcoin and I'd have my jet waiting for me.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that, Danielle. And I too, like you, I immigrated to the United States when I was 10 years old from South Africa, and we moved to Chicago. And at the age of 12, in order to buy the television that I so wanted, my father funded me. When I say funded me, he gave me the lawnmower to go around the neighborhood. And so I started my own lawn mowing business. And the first bank that I went to, so I was getting cash and he took me to the bank. It was Harris Bank, which is now BMO. So my first bank account also was a BMO bank account.
All right, got this. We got it going on. Fun. It's all meant to happen. It was.
So I had the pleasure of talking to Danielle a little bit previously to prep. And the first question I asked him was, so I looked at your resume, your background. You went to a great school. You went and became a Harvard lawyer, MBA, and then you got into music, entertainment, digital. Like, how did that transition? So give the group a perspective. How do you go from Harvard Law School, Business School to media mogul today?
Sure. Media mogul. My ego is going to be so big. I'm glad the doors are open. I've always been passionate about media and entertainment and music in particular. I was a drummer in a rock and roll band and wanted to be a famous musician. Then I saw the lifespan of drummers in rock is not very long. So I said, maybe I don't want to be the musician. I maybe want to be in the business side of things. So my father's in radio in Mexico. So he actually has a number of radio stations in Mexico. When I graduated from college, went to work in radio. And then I said, if I want to make it big in the music business, most of the largest companies are run by lawyers because you have to understand contracts. So ended up going to Harvard Law School, Harvard Business School. And I was actually all set to go work at BMG in New York and the BMG, Bertelsmann Music Group. Bertelsmann, this is back in 1995. I got a phone call from the head of HR from Bertelsmann. And they said, there's this thing called internet that is getting started. And we just signed a joint venture between AOL and Bertelsmann to bring AOL to Europe. Would you be interested in coming to Europe and just see what internet's all about? So I moved to Germany at the Bertelsmann headquarters, and then we worked in this internet thing. And that's how I got the internet bug. But in the back of my mind, I said, I want to go back to music. And, as things evolved, Bertelsmann then went into Napster, which you may remember was the music peer-to-peer service. And we lent Napster money. You can own an equity in them. We would have gone sued to oblivion by the record labels. And we tried to create a digital music service. So it was like a blending of internet and music, which was my passion. So unfortunately, Napster was too early for its time. And it was a shame because it had music lovers from everywhere around the world on this platform. But the record label sued it to oblivion. And around that time, Bertelsmann or BMG launched the next Whitney Houston album. So the next, meaning the big one, was My Bodyguard, or the Bodyguard soundtrack, which was tremendous success. And the next album that she launched was an album called Waiting to Exhale. And there was so much buzz around it. All the executives at the global level of Bertelsmann saying, let's get bet big on this thing. And you probably should have guessed from the title, Waiting to Exhale, that you run out of oxygen and, it's probably not a good thing. It was a complete and absolute flop. So we were left with inventory left and right. And there was a small company, it was like small internet in 95. There was a small company called Google back in 2002. And I went to the CEO of Bertelsmann. I said, you know what? How we went about this Whitney Houston release was all based on gut feel. There's this company, Google, that has all the search information what people like. Do they like Whitney Houston? Do they not like? Do they like song number 1, song number 5? So can I go pitch them on a joint venture opportunity between Bertelsmann and Google? I said, yeah, go do it. Went to these young founders, Larry and Sergey, and then pitched them on this idea of, let's do a joint venture between Bertelsmann and Google, and we'll create the best music JV. And if you're not interested in that, at least license us your data so we can do better marketing of our albums. And they looked at me and they said, we're nowhere near thinking about music, and even less thinking about selling our data. Would you be interested in joining Google? And I refer to that as my most successful, unsuccessful pitch I've ever done. I went pitching on this JV, and they pitched me on, why don't you join? And it was too good an opportunity. I ended up joining Google 20 years later, Activision, and then eventually back to my roots, which is now TelevisaUnivision.
Wow, that is fantastic. And how do you make that transition? And obviously, I just think of, the Forrest Gump moment. You're there at Google right at the beginning, and as it's developing as a company, go back to, you and I touched on the gaming element and where you see that and how that appealed to you and how that you saw that as part of your career move.
I had an epiphany in the early days of Google. There was a product that we launched that was called MapMaker. And it was a very, very simple product that, you might remember, some of you are my age, stopping off at the gas station to purchase a paper map to try to figure out where things were. And what MapMaker did is they took those maps, or Google took those maps, put them online, and let users create content around those maps. So you would have, that the map tells you that the McDonald's is right over there, and a user would say, no, it's not over there. It's one block closer. Or in developing nations where there were no maps, users would proactively go and then start mapping the world. So all of a sudden you went from an environment where maybe 25% of the world's streets were mapped to 99% of the world's streets were mapped. And it was all because of users coming together, passionate about what they were doing, creating MapMaker. And you could see it like live. I used to run, one of the many things I did at Google is I ran Google Asia. And I was based in both Tokyo and Singapore. And I could see, for instance, in Indonesia, day on day, how the maps, started growing like that, like weeds. And it was spectacular to see. So that epiphany for me was, how do you connect users to content and have users amplify the content? So as things started evolving, as internet connectivity became, more ubiquitous and obviously high bandwidth, I started following the trend of what is the next frontier for social? What is the next after, Google missed the boat on Facebook, obviously. But I said, what is going to be the next social network that's going to bring people together in the same way that MapMaker did, the same way that Facebook did? And for me, it was obvious it was game. because gaming is a way for you to meet new people, to play with them. It doesn't matter what race, color, country you're at. You create these incredible bonds, and people spend a lot of time playing games. So I had a long courtship with the CEO of Activision Blizzard, but he finally convinced me. He said, like, this is the time for us to help build that gaming can really be as that social network. There's obviously a great commercial economy around it, but that's how I ended up in game.
Danielle, it's easy to look back on your career and say, wow, those were great moves. But as I thought about that trajectory, at that moment in time, there was a lot of risk, right? You took on new opportunities, changes. What do you think it is about your personality or character that draws you to opportunities like that represents some material level of career and personal risk?
I have to default to the cop-out answer, and it's your parents. My father, he lost his mother when he was 13. He was the oldest of 5. He lied about his age so he can get into law school earlier. His father, unfortunately, was much older and was dysfunctional after his mother died. So he became the breadwinner of the family, and he had a why not attitude. Why not push yourself to be a lawyer and graduate at the age of 15? Why not start your own law firm? When an opportunity arose to open a radio station in Cancun back in 1988, the first FM station, said, well, why not? Why not do it? Like, what do you have to lose? And I saw that as a role model for me. And obviously my mom was incredibly important component of that. And look, I need to be intellectually challenged and intellectually stimulated. And that leads me to areas, like conversations like this or meeting people that you just say, I could keep doing what I'm doing, or I could stay home and watch. Actually, you should stay home and watch TV, or go out to an event like this. And serendipity is you're sitting next to Larry Page, and you talk about music, and all of a sudden, well, here's an opportunity what we could do. And then things evolve, and you have to ask yourself, why not?
That's awesome. You're blessed to have that role model in your life. And you've touched on this. And another thing that struck me is the variety of places you've lived and worked. All right. You've touched on Mexico City, Canada, Germany, Singapore, Tokyo. I know you're now in Dallas. Give me some perspective on you with your history and culture. Have you found that being of Mexican heritage at a certain point, given that variety, became irrelevant? As you think about your Latino heritage, how has that impacted or been felt for you through your career?
That's a great question. I think many of us here who are Hispanic in the United States go through the identity crisis. Are you Hispanic? Do you fit into American culture? Do you fit into the true Hispanic culture? It was hard in my teenage years or my early 20s that I didn't really quite fit in with one or the other. But as I evolved in my life and my career, then building a family, I saw such tremendous benefits from being able to be international. It's 10 years in Mexico, 10 years in Canada, college, grad school, and a lot of my professional career here. Honestly, I look at myself as NAFTA. But it also, as many of us have lived for sure, it makes you also very receptive to other people's differences, and aware of their differences. And I think that's a huge advantage, right? Because, very early thing I did when I was in college, my sister was working at the Mexican embassy in Tokyo. And I was in between my sophomore and senior year in Princeton. And she said, why don't you come and teach English in Japan? Why not? I didn't speak a word of Japanese and said, why not? So I went to teach English. And, sitting there at dinner with executives that I was supposed to teach them English, they bring a plate, and a bowl of rice, and they ask me a question. I have the chopsticks, and I go, let me answer the question. I stick chopsticks in the rice. And then all of a sudden, everybody goes quiet, and I go, I just say something? And they said, no, that represents death in Japan. And you put the chopstick in rice. You get it out, right? So those are the kinds of things that all of us we're really, really chameleons. We're very, very sensitive to these nuances. And I think that actually makes us better human beings, but also from a business perspective, more receptive as to how you fit your product to the needs of our community.
That's great perspective. Better listeners, better awareness is helpful.
And I would say just 2 lessons. Don't put chopstick in the rice. And number 2, the other thing I learned when I was running park trips at Google, never send Chinese a clock, because that also means we hope you're dying.
I'll remember that one.
We'll cheer this conversation up in just a second. We'll not talk about debt, but just don't make those mistakes.
There's no equivalency here. Don't worry. At what point in your career did you then turn to say, I'm supposed to give back, get involved, mentor Hispanic Latino leaders in my organization or outside? And when did you see those opportunities and recognize and get involved in yourself?
It started in law school. I was approached, I was as part of the Hispanic group at Harvard Law School. And there was a group that donated their time to underprivileged Hispanics who were needing legal representations. So went to this community center, and there were Hispanics whose parents, whose mother, daughter, family member had been deported. And, some of the stories that I heard of, I remember this so clearly. This woman said that her husband was working in a factory, and the foreman of the factory called them in and said, we need you guys to come work overtime on Saturday. It just happened to coincide with a unionization movement that the factory was having. So we'll come on Saturday because we need to finish this line. Lo and behold, the factory owner called in immigration and had all those people deported because, 1, he had hired illegally, but 2, they were trying to unionize. So he got sent over to Mexico. And that really struck me, like things that we take for granted, that, you expect your father and your mother to come home, and one day they don't. And what happened? So that's what impacted me personally. I said, I need to do more to help those who are underprivileged. When I was joining Google, the CFO of Google, a man by the name of George Reyes, Cuban, was instrumental into my onboarding at Google. And I was just amazed that such a hot, startup, an innovative startup as Google had a Hispanic as a CFO. And that he took time for me as a 30-year-old punk to come work at Google. And ever since then, I've been the head of Hispanics at Google, the head of Hispanics at Activision, and now I'm the head of Hispanics in the United States and Mexico, which is the universe. I really fundamentally believe that particularly the mission that we have is to connect, form, and entertain our Hispanic communities wherever we operate.
That's awesome. It's, ultimately, you don't get to the roles that you're in, achieve the success that you have without being somebody who gives back and gets involved. When you think about what's expected of a senior leader, a CEO today, you've built up a track record of those engagements where you wouldn't be in the seat that you're in. Daniel, thank you. I'm going to wrap by saying thank you again for being our guest, and congratulations on your success. And thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed it.
I very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. You can follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. For more episodes, visit bmocm.com/marketsplus.
The views expressed here are those of the participants and may not necessarily represent those of BMO Capital Markets, its affiliates, or subsidiaries. For BMO disclosures, please visit bmocm.com/podcast/disclaimer.